In this lesson, we will continue our focus on understanding appropriate IT security policy frameworks. And so first, we will focus our attention on a topic that we need to first grasp, and that is understanding what is a policy. And so we want to keep in mind when we think about what exactly is a policy, we want to focus our attention on the high-level statements, beliefs, and goals and objectives that are expected to be the focus on for our organization. We also want to be sure that we focus our attention on what is needed in order to help to protect an organization as well. And then we also want to be sure that we are able to provide the what and why of the security measures that need to be taken, and also understand appropriate informations that should be in place to help us with our security policies. So our policies are going to be in place in order to help us to describe how our program should run. We're going to want to understand the day-to-day work, the training and awareness that needs to be conducted, and we'll also want to focus on compliance issues and how they should be handled as well. And so when we are identifying appropriate standards for our frameworks and policies, we want to make sure that we have formal documents that are in place. And these documents will be there in order to help us to establish appropriate criteria to evaluate and measure. We want to understand the methods that are in place and how they are going to help us to accomplish our goal. And we want to also be sure to focus on appropriate actions that are repeatable and allow us to make the best in regards to compliance. We'll also need to ensure that we include issue-specific standards. So this should be focused on appropriate areas that are relevant of concern for our organization. And then we'll also want to have system-specific standards and baseline standards that are in place. And these are going to be standards that will help to secure the configuration of devices that are within our organization or on our network. And so within our framework, we're also going to have to focus our attention on specific procedures. And what we want to understand is what exactly do we mean by these procedures? And the procedures provide written instruction on how to comply with a specific standard. So this is going to enable us to have specific directives that we would follow in order to accomplish our appropriate policies. And then we're also going to want to make sure that we have specific actions that are in place, and these actions are what are going to be executed and repeatedly to perform the procedure that needs to be accomplished as well. And so with these procedures, we're going to want to make sure that we have in place clear directives, because the procedures are going to provide appropriate ways in which we can obtain the needed results required. So procedures will be in place to help us support the policy framework, as well as codifying the steps that are needed to ensure that our systems are compliant. And so procedures in general need to be clear and unambiguous. We want them to be repeatable. We want them to be up to date, and we want them to be tested and well documented. And so clear and ambiguous is, of course, important because we want each and every appropriate employee or stakeholder to be able to follow the procedures without any doubt in any of the steps. And this should be repeatable in that it clearly outlines and allows for the process to be repeated. We want it to be up to date. So that means that the procedures should apply to the current day-to-day operations of the organization. So if the organization in the past used Windows machines, but now everyone uses Apple or Mac machine, then the procedures should be up to date to reflect those changes. And if any steps need to be updated to account for the new type of technology being used, and that should be documented and updated. And then those procedures should be tested, and everything, of course, should be documented. And we have various examples of different types of procedures, of course, that we can follow. So these include, of course, incident reporting, server configuration, emergency evacuation as well. So another thing that we need to consider is, of course, appropriate guidelines. And so this is important because IT security managers are going to definitely be in place in order to help prepare the guidelines and provide guidance documents so that policy and standards are interpreted correctly. And the guidelines will need to be there to present the current thinking on a specific topic. And so guidelines are going to be appropriate recommendations. In some cases, they don't necessarily need to be mandatory, but it can denote that if the guidelines are not followed, that this could lead to appropriate compliance issues. And so rather, we want the guidelines to be in place to help with the development of procedures and processes appropriately. So a guideline can be in place to help clarify issues or problems that have arisen. And this is what allows for us to provide a set of standards and baseline information that we can use to help maintain compliance. And so in many cases, we want to consider that guidelines can become a standard if they are adopted and they are widely accepted and implemented. And so there are appropriate business considerations that should be made when we're considering frameworks. So an organization is going to need to keep intact a collection of different policies. And so this could be related to the cost and impact that the framework is going to have. And the cost is going to be the cost of implementing and maintaining the framework. The impact is going to be the impact of the controls required by the framework for customers, employees, and business process units. So it's important that we create a policy framework that helps to manage these types of expenses. And so there are a number of different documents that can be in our framework. And so that will cause the framework to grow. So in order to deal with this, we need to make sure that we also have appropriate components in place to help manage appropriate costs as well. And so a content management system can be put in place as well to help manage the number of different documents that are going to need to be utilized in the framework. And so there are different roles that also need to be considered when we're looking at developing policy and standards. So CISO can be used as a role, and it helps to establish and maintain security and risk management programs for the information resources that are needed. We'll also have appropriate information resource managers. These managers are going to be in place to help maintain policies and procedures that provide appropriate security and risk management for information resources. We'll also need to have in place a information resources security officer. The information resource security officer is going to have a responsibility of directing the policies and procedures, and in making sure that they're designed to protect appropriate information resources. They also should be able to identify vulnerabilities and develop security awareness programs. Other owners of information resources are also going to need to be present, and these owners are going to be responsible for carrying out the program that uses the resources. And, and this is important to consider that it does not necessarily imply that the owners are or have ownership over those resources. Other roles that need to be included include custodians of information resources. These custodians will be in place to help provide technical facilities, data processing, and other support services to owners and users of information resources. Technical managers are also going to need to be in place. These technical managers will be there to provide technical support for security of information resources. And then we'll also need internal auditors. The auditors are going to be there to help conduct periodic risk-based reviews to ensure the effectiveness of information resources, security policies, as well as procedures. And then we'll also have appropriate control partners. Control partners are going to be there to ensure that the security policies provide for appropriate operational compliance and that appropriate regulatory requirements are being met and risk is being minimized. And then another important role will be users, and the users will have access to appropriate information resources in accordance with owner-defined controls as well as appropriate access rules. So there are various considerations that we need to keep in mind with our information assurance considerations, but we have to keep into consideration are the goals of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And so information assurance includes non-repudiation and authentication. So one of the prime objectives of that is to assure that all of our information is protected. And so we want to ensure confidentiality, and this is maintained by ensuring that the information that is present is limited in access and is only allowed by authorized users. We want to ensure the integrity of information as well. So we want to ensure that it's maintained and can be trusted for decision making. We also want to ensure that availability is present, and this means that only authorized users can access the information when they need to access it. And so with this in mind, non-repudiation is going to help us to ensure that an individual can't deny or dispute being part of a transaction. So if we have our goals of confidentiality, integrity, and availability in place, then we're able to ensure that. And so remember that we abbreviate this as our CIA triad. So what we want to be sure is that we're meeting a number of different goals when it comes to this. So those goals include making sure we have automation of security controls where possible. We want to ensure that we are appropriately implementing appropriate measures for accounting and integrity controls. We want to ensure that we have a handle on how information is being accessed. We want to ensure that we have appropriate systems in place that can detect and thwart attempts for unauthorized activities. And we also want to ensure we have a level of uptime for all of our systems. And so with this in mind, we have a fine-grained policy that is in place, and this is going to be in place to help automate access to specific components. Also, it's important to keep in mind that the granularity for our policies when it comes to integrity, we want to have our policies to be as granular as possible so that it's easy to enforce. And this, again, helps to make it unambiguous. The finer granularity helps to provide specificity for us so that we have a understanding of the actions and the intended consequences as well.